The Victor Black Masterclass presentation is brought to you by www.muscleandiron.com.
Howdy, hello and welcome to another Victor Black Masterclass video. In today's video, we are going to start the discussion. We're going to open the door on the discussion about cognitive enhancement practices. We're going to talk about the strategies and the principles of basically improving your intelligence and your memory and really all aspects of cognitive function. And we're going to be including in that conversation the potential application of nootropic agents or cognitive enhancement supplementation and pharmacology. In my opinion, if you don't know anything about nootropics, if you have no experience in this field, but you are interested in learning more, this potentially could be the most important video you ever watch about nootropics. And hopefully by the time you get to the end of this video, you will agree that it will have been well worth your 20 or 30 minutes invested in watching this content. So let's get started with this video. So the first thing I want to point out here is this, and that is, in my opinion, most people that walk into this room and want to talk about performance enhancement, whether they are interested in cognitive performance enhancement or whether they're interested in the use of performance and image enhancing drugs, they both make the same mistake, okay, which is fascinating. Because you could basically say, you could make an argument that nootropics and cognitive performance enhancement and the use of PEDs are actually two sides to the same coin. They are ultimately about pushing our limits beyond natural capability or natural capacity with due regard to you as a genetically unique individual. However, most beginners, most people, as I said, that walk into this room immediately gravitate to and want to talk about the drugs, right? They want to know what's the strongest steroid there is, where can I get it, and how much do I need to take, right? And in the same manner, most people that want to start, learning about nootropics and the potential application of nootropics immediately grab towards guess what? The drugs. What's the most powerful nootropic there is? Where do I get it and how much do I take? And in both circumstances, this is a monumental mistake. Hopefully, if you use performance enhancing drugs today and you have some experience in that space, but you don't know very much about nootropics, you will appreciate this, basically without argument. The pathway to the successful deployment of performance enhancing drugs begins not at the drugs themselves, but at the foundational steps of physique development. In other words, what we call natural bodybuilding, okay? For someone that doesn't train, for someone that doesn't have the right lifestyle and behaviors in place, for someone that doesn't have an appropriate nutritional plan, for someone that really, doesn't have any experience as a natural bodybuilder, the idea of them, reaching at first line of action for the drugs is ludicrous. It's fucking ludicrous. Hopefully anyone that uses PEDs would know that's true. Of course, in the real world, that is, rife in our community. You only have to spend a little time on the Facebook groups and the forums to see that's true. People using ridiculous amounts of drugs that basically don't even look like they go to the gym. And the fundamental reason behind that is they have no natural base on which they are building. So how does this equate, right, to cognitive function enhancement? It's really exactly the same story. So let's explore what that is. So the first major point that I basically want to make here is that when you speak to most people about cognitive function performance enhancement, most of them are actually talking about their version, their view, their perspective through their filters. For many, many people, what that basically means is the idea you take a healthy young person, man or woman, and you give them some sort of drug and their intelligence or their cognitive function is either temporarily or permanently improved by the administration of that drug. That's what they think. That's the filter they see things through. And that's probably best represented through movies like Limitless, where you have a less than average person basically takes a pill and suddenly they're the world's smartest person. Of course, in reality, this is completely ludicrous, and You know, it just leads, like so many things, to misunderstandings and mythologies in the space. But there are other potential applications for cognitive function enhancement, including the potential application towards training outcomes, so as training potentiators, specifically with regard to improving or optimizing the mind-muscle connection. Now, I will agree that based on the specificity of your training, so in other words, the more skill-based your training is, people like Olympic lifters, hopefully you would appreciate that the skill that's required to undertake Olympic lifting successfully is exponentially greater than someone that involves in the lifts that we use in bodybuilding. But there is potential application here across the board. Bodybuilders, powerlifters, strongmen, Olympic lifters, those in the fight game, pretty much across the board, those interested in strength and conditioning have the potential to leverage these types of strategies and these types of supplements and these types of compounds to improve their training outcomes. There is another very, very large group, potentially the largest of all of the niches, and that is in the use of these strategies in anti-aging. This is basically the use of strategy and pharmacology and supplementation as a means of protecting ourselves against neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and dementia, etc. And then a very small group, really this is our tribe, should be interested in this domain from the point of view of mitigating the repercussions of use of anabolic steroid use. This is very, very closely related to that group 3. Okay, if you haven't yet watched my content, I have a video in masterclass basically entitled something along the lines of does using anabolic steroids increase your risk of dementia later in life? If you haven't watched that video, you should watch that video as a foundation, as a precursor to these discussions that will follow on from there. So let's basically move to the next slide. And I want to basically, as I said, reiterate this position. Nootropics, cognitive performance enhancement strategies, are no different than performance enhancing drug strategies, in so much as that there is a hierarchical nature in the way you approach the development, planning, and execution of successful strategies. And in the world of PEDs, you don't start the discussion with what's the strongest steroid there is. That's not the first conversation you have, okay? First, you talk about potentially, okay, so we need to understand just a little bit about the physiology of hypertrophic response. You do not need to have postgraduate degree in sports science, but just understanding the fundamentals of what causes a hypertrophic response will stand you in good stead in future discussions. And then, of course, we need to talk about lifestyle modifications, taking someone who's Citizen Joe and introducing them to the world of performance optimization. Very often you need to talk about lifestyle strategies, quality of sleep, drinking alcohol, smoking cigarettes. They're like high stress environments. There are just so many aspects of these strategies that you need to put into place on a preferential basis. In other words, what comes first, right? Get off the booze. Start getting quality of sleep into your life during, even potentially before we talk about nutritional interventions here. Some of these lifestyle factors and behaviors just have to be addressed right up front. Someone that's drinking a bottle of alcohol and smoking 2 packets of cigarettes a day, that's not a fabulous foundation to start anything from, okay? So we start with basically a discussion about lifestyle strategies. We move to a discussion about optimizing your diet for physical performance in bodybuilding. And then we talk about training programming. And then really we get to the point where we are capable and competent natural physique athletes, natural bodybuilders. Even if you're just training for recreational purposes, you have a natural base on which you then layer performance enhancing drugs. And this is exactly the same discussion you need to have when it comes to nootropics. So first we need to understand how the brain actually works, what we're trying to do here. We need to talk about lifestyle strategies that maximize cognitive potential. We then need to talk about dietary interventions, nutritional interventions that maximize mental performance. We need to talk just like about in the gym. There's no point with someone that doesn't go to the gym taking steroids. It's stupid. There's, in my opinion, no point in someone that's not mentally exercising their mind, stretching their mind, deliberately setting out to learn new things in a deliberate, strategic manner using these drugs, right? And then once we get there, we have a discussion about supplementation, and we have a discussion about even pharmacology in this regard, but you don't start that discussion at that point. Now, as I said, if you use PEDs, hopefully the light bulb just went off and you go, yeah, hello, of course, you need to have a natural base, an understanding of these principles in place. I've been training for a couple of years, have good dietary practice, have good sleep hygiene practice, have good lifestyle and behavior practice, have a good training program in place, and then we start to talk about the drugs. This is the problem with nootropics. Everybody is interested in the smart drugs, and they think because of movies like Limitless, the extent of this conversation is, give me one of those pills and how many do I take a day, and suddenly my intelligence, capacity is going to temporarily or permanently improve. And nothing could be further from the truth. And guess what? This is what most of the information you hear from the market is. Why? Because the people providing the information are supplying the products. All right? Surprise, surprise. Right? So today, in this video, all I really want to talk about is some very, very high level concepts here about what we're actually up to. And then, as I said, hopefully from just this few minutes of content that's about to follow now, you will have the best possible foundation to walk into future discussions about this. Firstly, what we need to understand is this, that the typical human brain weighs about 3 pounds and contains billions of neurons, like somewhere between 80, 100, and 120 billion neurons, right? And each of those neurons, each of those 80 to 120 billion neurons contains on average 50,000 connections with other neurons, okay? Now, these numbers are almost basically impossible to comprehend. It's enough just to basically say that's an overwhelmingly large number. It's almost hard to visualize what those numbers look like. Very, very, very large number sets here. The reason you need to understand that is that there are basically 3 primary drivers behind any strategy to improve cognitive performance. And they fundamentally are this, and that is, either we are trying to increase the efficiency with which these neurons communicate with each other through their synaptic connections, okay? Or we're trying to increase the number and the strength of the connections between the neurons, or we're trying to increase the number of the neurons themselves, okay? Now, in an ideal world, any strategy would be based on trying to incrementally improve each of these areas. And you can potentially improve each of these areas through similar strategies, but also potentially different strategies. So different products and different supplementation have the potential to work more or less on each of these areas. Okay, so hopefully that kind of makes sense. So it's not a problem with a solution. We are trying to, as I said, increase the efficiency with which neurons communicate. Okay, we are trying to increase the number and the strength of the connections between your neurons, or we are trying to increase the number of the neurons themselves. And as I said, in an ideal world, we want to do all of those things, principally because when you marginally increase each of these areas, there is a synergistic outcome. A small increase in each of these areas results in a sum of the parts improvement in total cognitive function capacity. That's very profound. That might sound very, very simple, but it's very profound because it is from that understanding that we start to open the discussion about, okay, so what's the strategy? How are we going to move forward here? What are the resources that we're going to bring to bear, and in what order, how do we prioritize things, etc., etc., etc. Before we get on to an explanation of what that might look like in the real world, I do want to make a couple of comments here. Firstly, yes, it is true that genetics does influence your intelligence potential, okay? It is true. There is a genetic component here, okay? However, we can improve our short-term and our long-term cognitive potential via lifestyle and behaviors and various interventions that act on these drivers that I mentioned previously, okay? It's genetics that determines your potential total intellectual capacity, but it's your environment and your behaviors that determine whether or not you as a genetically unique individual reach that potential. And very, very, very few people here reach their own genetic potentials, okay? So when we look at strategies, when we start to talk about these behaviors, these lifestyle and behaviors and interventions, it's important to understand they fall broadly into two categories, two classes. Either they minimize or they reduce the negative impact on those three domains, okay? Or they promote the system efficiency or the growth of new neurons and new synapses, okay? So in other words, they are either behaviors and actions that mitigate negative outcomes, or they are behaviors and outcomes that promote growth and promote system efficiency. And again, if you understand that, then logically and rationally you'd go, maybe we should start with the minimization of any lifestyle behaviors that we're currently engaging in, which are dragging us down now. That's the cheapest, that's the most beneficial potentially, right? And that's the easiest one to understand from a technical, competency point of view. Let me just basically explain what a few of those concepts would be. Now, this is a graphical representation of both biomarkers, in other words, blood work and biomarkers, and various interventions that are consequential to the impact of dementia. Okay, now as I said, dementia is one aspect or one element of this entire discussion, and hopefully we can agree to use it as a springboard into this discussion. And what you'll see on this graphic is, as I said, at the top right-hand corner, there is a component of genetics at play here. Absolutely. There is genetics in your intellectual capacity. There is genetics in your vulnerability to disease states like dementia, disease states like Alzheimer's. There's absolutely a genetic component here. But there are also a number of interventions that we control that minimize the risk of that disease state. And they begin with, as I said, practices like stop smoking cigarettes, don't drink alcohol to excess, try to avoid high stress environments, okay? Avoid clinical obesity. These are hopefully common sense things, but the reason I think they're important is because even if you look at them and you go check, 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 you have the right mindset, you have the right framework saying we're starting at the beginning. We're starting at the baseline. Fuck this conversation about the drugs straight away. We don't need to get into that straight away. It's going to come, all right? Just like it should come with the steroids, right? But if you're still smoking and you're still drinking, you shouldn't be using steroids, right? And if you're still smoking and you're still drinking and you're clinically obese, right, and you live in a high stress environment, these nootropic agents that you hear so much about, these supplements, they're not really going to do very much for you. That's the truth. They're going to cost you money, right? They're going to escalate your hopes, as it were. They're not going to deliver very much. These are very powerful tools when they are executed and when they are introduced at the appropriate time, okay? The first thing we need to address is lifestyle behaviors. Now, the good news is for most people in my tribe, many of these behaviors are exactly the same behaviors that are required for a high performance physique development, okay? Smoking cigarettes, drinking alcohol, high stress environment, recreational drugs, clinical obesity, none of these conditions, call them disease states if you will, I don't even care if you want to call them disease states, none of these conditions are conducive to optimal outcomes, okay? So we need to firstly address those. Now, if you are an individual that can check those boxes, like myself, great, you check those boxes and you move on, right? The next conversation then potentially is about supplementation like antioxidants, understanding that when there is oxidative stress at play here, we need to have a discussion about, so what role can high quality nutritional intervention bring? A diet rich in fruits and vegetables and phytonutrients and micronutrients is the foundation stone for that discussion. Obviously, then there is room for a discussion about supplementational antioxidants that gets layered on top of that. And obviously, the next level up from that, and this is the top of the page, which is represented up here, there is an opportunity for us to use on-demand blood work, basically through private pathology labs, to help us ensure that we are on the right track here. Many of the interventions that we basically need to put into place for optimal performance outcomes, both, as I said, physiologically and cognitively, can be to some extent monitored through blood work and monitored through health markers like insulin resistance. Okay, so this is the tier that we get to, the second layer, as it were. Okay, so we've talked about lifestyle and behavior. We talked about nutritional intervention, and we'll talk more about this in detail as we go forward. We need to talk about potential, the inclusion of a diet rich in fruits and vegetables and antioxidants and phytonutrients and all the many, many benefits of that. There's the potential, as I said, for supplementation following on from that. And then what we need to do is we need to, in the same way when we talk about training in the gym, we should be talking about training your brain. One of the most profound things that you can possibly do in the prevention of these disease states is be constantly learning new things. Okay, one of the greatest triggers, one of the greatest promoters of neuroplasticity, basically your brain growing, for want of a better word, is providing a need. Okay, I am very passionate about learning new things, and I think I learn new things because I'm very interested in learning new things by nature. They say curiosity killed the cat. I completely disagree. I think curiosity made the cat smarter, but also I'm honest enough to admit that I actually see it as an intervention against Alzheimer's and age-related diseases, being mentally active, right? At 52 years old, I am probably learning more today, learning more new things than at any other point in my life. I am very aggressively interested in mental cognitive development, and so far there's not a nootropic, there's not a supplement in that category in sight. Okay, so once you get to that level, once you are proactively engaged in mental development and understanding the role that potentially plays in these discussions, then we can open the door, then we can open the discussion into pharmacological interventions. Now, I just wanted to show you this. This is not necessarily about nootropics per se. I'm going to just close off the video with a discussion about it. This is a graphical representation from 2019, from last year, looking at all of the drugs that are basically in the Alzheimer's drug development pipeline in the various stages of clinical trialing, from stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 trials. Okay, and you can see here there's a lot of them. Okay, so this is an extremely complicated space. It's very interesting. Some of these drugs you will know, some of them I've never heard of them before. The major point here is that this is the least well understood, this is the least well researched, and this is the most difficult part of this conversation to write a prescription for someone. Okay, what do we take? Okay, it's actually rather speculative, to be honest. Okay, this is, as I said, an area that I'm fascinated in. It's probably the fastest growing and hottest topic in pharmacology today. I'm fascinated by it. But it's very, very speculative. It's very hard to say you should do this, this, and this. Okay, it really becomes a very interesting but speculative conversation. Okay, however, the first parts, if we go back to that slide that I had previously, this, in my opinion, is not speculation. Okay, you being clinically obese, you having a poor diet, you smoking cigarettes, you drinking alcohol, you basically not exercising, you doing this, and this. Not only does it, prevent you from having optimal cognitive function today, right? These are negatively impacting your capacity, but it is setting you up for problems in the future. The number of individuals that will experience age-related, degenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and dementia is staggering, right? And in my opinion, the overwhelming majority of those people kind of walked into it. They didn't look after themselves in their early years. They had poor diets, they had poor exercise practices, they took on stress, things that we know create oxidative stress, like alcohol and drinking, smoking cannabis, etc., 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 and worst of all, in my opinion, they stopped learning. Right? They stopped demanding, basically what we call neuroplasticity. All right? That's, to me, a really important element here. So, over the coming weeks, we are going to be talking about all of these things. Okay. We are also going to be going back. Let me just click back to that original slide. We're going to be breaking out into some, sub discussions about this with due regard to the use of these strategies as training potentiators, improving the mind-muscle connection. And we're going to be breaking out into areas like the mitigation of the neurophysiological repercussions of the use of anabolic steroids and other PEDs in this regard, okay? But please understand, the entire conversation, if you are interested in following it, is going to take the same framework as you would take with the application of PEDs. I do not support, nor do I recommend that someone that has a poor diet, that someone that doesn't train, that someone has poor lifestyle and behaviors take steroids. I don't support that. I don't condone it. I'm openly critical of it. Okay, I think it's a stupid thing to do, and you're just setting yourself up for problems. Okay, I have exactly the same philosophy when it comes to the use of nootropic agents. Right, if you don't have these quality of life factors in place, okay. If you are not aware of the foundation that's required for these drugs basically to be laid on top of, you are setting yourself up for problems, in my opinion, okay? The least problem is nothing is going to happen. You're going to spend your money and you're going to see no outcome. I can personally attest the fact that if you do this the right way, these drugs are extraordinary. Just like steroids are, just like other performance enhancing drugs. You don't need tons of these things to get fabulous outcomes. But that is premised on, that is reliant on you having the foundation in place. Okay? You can't just start taking steroids. You can't just start taking nootropics. It doesn't work that way. Okay? So as I said, bear with us and understand, if there's a takeaway here, I want you to basically have it to be this. Okay? Whatever we are talking about, whatever intervention we're going to be discussing is going to be premised on the idea that we're going to be trying to increase the efficiency with which neurons communicate with each other, okay? The second thing is we're going to be trying to increase the number and strength of the connections between neurons. And the third thing we're going to be trying to do is increasing the number of brain cells. We're going to be trying to improve each of these areas, and in an ideal world, we're going to basically improve them all. So we'll have a synergistic effect. The sum of the parts will be greater than the individual parts themselves. So all of that, there's a lot of content to come. All of that will be coming in the coming weeks and months in Masterclass. I hope you will join us there. If you're not yet a member of Masterclass, membership is just $10 a month, okay? As always, if you're a Masterclass member and you have any questions, feel free to ask them. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you at the next Victor Black Masterclass. Sawadee ka.
The Victor Black Masterclass presentation is brought to you by www.muscleandiron.com.